It's time for a Chat with Pat.
Yeah, and today we have with us Randall Smith. You've heard him before on this show and also on The Virtuous Life. He's a professor of theology at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. He wrote an article in the Catholic Thing, which I read a lot, called Evangelizing in Silence. It's an interesting title and an interesting article. Randall, welcome to the show again. Good to hear from you.
Oh, yeah, it's nice to be back. Nice to talk to you.
Well, Randall, this is, reading the title kind of went, I went, what is this about? And then I started reading. So it is, what kind of inspired you to write this? Because this takes us down a road that no one talks about in evangelization.
Yeah, just to make clear, it was about the fact that so many people who are hearing impaired, like deaf, right? Like something like 96% of people who are deaf have no church that they go to. So
Wow.
they were totally, to use the term, unchurched. I knew about this actually because we have a dear friend who we spend a lot of time with, and she has a sister who is deaf and is married to a deaf man, and now actually they have a deaf child, because that can sometimes happen. It doesn't always happen, but it sometimes happens. Anyway, and so through her, I became aware of some of the statistics about deaf people. So that huge numbers, for example, way over 50% of deaf children have parents, particularly fathers, who never learned to sign, right? And so they're really not only sort of left in silence, but no one speaks to them. These people oftentimes think that, and this is another thing I had not realized, sign language is not signing English. Sign language is its own complete language with its own grammar and syntax and everything else. So you're not really signing English. You're signing something else. So anyway, when people who are deaf go to Mass and they don't have someone who's translating for them, you understand this is even worse than if you and I go to Mass and it was in, Tagalog or, Ugaritic
language,
or
yeah.
ancient Greek or something, and you're like, I have no idea what they're. At least we can kind of hear what's going on. All they can do is look around. They can see that people are doing something. So anyway, I became aware of this through this dear friend of mine who deals with disabilities. But in any case, and I thought, well, this is terrible, right? We're not doing what we need to be doing. I mean, it's true with a number of disabilities. I have other friends who have. I have a friend who has a child with Down syndrome and Catholic schools there. But anyway, this was one that I became aware of and thought, well, this is this is one that's actually solvable, but we're not doing it.
Right. So, Randall, I was kind of surprised in the sense that, because a lot of people respond, like you say in the article, well, just because you're deaf doesn't mean you can't read. You couldn't follow along like in the missalette. But you kind of say, well, that's not necessarily true. So can you kind of explain that to us? Because I would have been one of those people that would have said, well, they can read, so they can, so how do you deal with that kind of an issue?
It is true, but again, it's just important to understand that for deaf people, learning to read is very much different from a hearing person's ability to read. As a friend of mine described it to me, she said, look, we understand the difference between cat and cab, one being a car that drives and the other being a little furry creature, because of the sound, whereas deaf people can't do that. So for them, she said, it's like if you were reading numbers and you had 314 suggested like cat and 318 suggested cab, and then you could kind of see the difference. But the point is, that's why it's for them, we have letters that represent sounds, okay? But that's not what is happening for deaf people. So it's very much harder for them to learn to read and to go through. It's much easier for them. And it's very interesting, actually, that deaf children, so her nephew who's a deaf child, deaf children will learn to sign sooner than hearing children can learn to speak. because, in fact, the signs they can do, but, it's very hard for them to learn to speak or to read.
Yeah.
Because, again, they don't hear the sounds that we hear. So, again, it's very important that we make that translation for them into their language, which is sign language, literally signing.
Yeah. Do you? And it's interesting you say that, because I know a lot of people. In fact, some of my nieces and nephews, when they have children, they teach them signs, like simple signs. Like more. What do you want? More, or things like that.
Yeah.
Before they can speak. So they're learning some of those things before they can speak. But Randall, have you talked to any dioceses? Do you know? Are there any parishes or dioceses that are addressing these issues, and how would they know if they need this in their parish?
I didn't talk to, but I have talked to my friend, and she knows, right, from her own personal experience, that it is very difficult to find places that have, translations for the deaf. Not impossible. There are parishes that do it. And there are in dioceses sometimes like maybe one church somewhere that will do it. But part of the problem, as she explains to me, is that people will say, and understandably, but we don't have any deaf people in our parish. And well, of course you don't, because they won't come unless there's translation, right?
Right.
So they don't, it's, again, this is why I call it evangelizing. It's like, well, look, you'd have to make an outreach to these people and say, no, we have something here for you so you can fully understand and participate in the Mass, because we have a huge population of people. Again, as I said, like 96% of deaf people do not go to any church because there's nothing there for them. Yeah. So if we taught people to sign and to be able to do this translating, and we made this outreach to deaf people, right, this is an entire population that we could draw back to Christ, right, and to the church, because no one speaks to them, and there are very few also deaf priests. There are, I think, in the whole of the United States, maybe 2 or 3 actual deaf priests who could then do the Mass and sign the entire thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I know years ago in our diocese, I know we had a parish designated in Toledo for the deaf, and they always had a signer at the masses, and I used to do music there, and it was always kind of interesting to see them sing. I'm playing music, and they have a signer in front, and they're all doing, they're all singing with their hands, which was great. I know that church has closed, so I don't know if another one has been designated in our diocese. But I think you're right. It is that thing that we don't think we have anybody who have these issues, and how we deal with it as people get older. The hard of hearing, you'll find parishes that will employ some kind of hearing devices for them, et cetera, that might help them out. But this was an eye-opener, Randall. I really thank you for writing this. This was great.
Well, thank you for having me on so we could talk more about it.
Yeah, and I would encourage people that are listening to see what does your diocese offer. Is there something that you could get involved in and help out? So thanks again, Randall. Have a good week ahead.
You too.
Bye-bye.
God bless.